All right. You guys are making your way back to your seat. Man, it is so good to be with you guys tonight. You guys, we got to meet earlier. My name's Rory. I am honored to be with y'all, and I mean that. I don't just say that. But one thing I want to say to you guys before we open up the Bible here in a second is one of the things that you guys should know as students in this room is that, like, your youth pastors, your youth leaders, volunteers from your churches, like, they have put so much time and energy into making sure that you got here for this week. And so it can be easy for me as someone who stands on a stage to be viewed as like the important person in the room right now, but that's not true. The important people in the room right now are your youth pastors and your youth leaders. So can we celebrate them? Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. They are some of the best people in the world, some of the brightest people in the world, and they're going to walk with you some of the best and worst days of your high school life. So, first question for you tonight. Can you remember the last time that you were distracted? For some of you, it just happened. For some of you, you didn't even hear the question because you were distracted by like that girl you think is cute that you've been like checking out all week, or that guy that you're interested in talking to. You're not even listening to me yet. We're going to get there. I can remember when I was a senior in high school, and I played soccer as a senior in high school. And as an upperclassman, the responsibility that we were given was to make sure that the underclassmen found their way to soccer practice on time. So the way that worked is myself and some of the other upperclassmen, we would just drive the underclassmen to practice. And I can remember one day, me and my buddy Michael, he was a senior in high school as well, is we both had our cars full of juniors and sophomores and freshmen, and we were driving to soccer practice. And those of you in the room who have a driver's license, you know there's this like weird, stupid thing that we do where when you're driving to the same place with your friend, you're not racing them there, but you're sort of like antagonizing one another with your cars. You guys know exactly what this is like. And so me and Michael, we were doing this. We were driving to soccer practice, and we're both like antagonizing each other. And as this is going on, all these underclassmen in my car are trying to have conversations with me about something. So in the front seat of my car is this guy named Brian. Brian, he was like 6'5", 280 pounds or something, big dude. But Brian and I, we bonded over like our love for rap music. And this was back in the day when we all thought Lil Wayne was the greatest rapper alive. We know that's not so true now, but nonetheless, so Brian is like yapping my ear off about some new Lil Wayne record that's come out. In the back seat is my friend Shaquille. And Shaquille is the opposite of whatever you think of when you hear Shaquille. Shaquille was like 5'4", weighed like maybe 100 pounds. And he loved basketball. And Shaquille, he's like yapping my ear off because he had this hot take that he thought Dwayne Wade was the best shooting guard of all time. So better than Michael Jordan, better than Kobe Bryant. And we all know that that is a terrible take to make in public. And then in the back seat, we had our friend Andrew, but we didn't call Andrew, we called Andrew Pookie. And Pookie was a conspiracy theorist to the full. Like as a 15-year-old, Pookie believed that everybody was like a lizard person deep down and was like, there were aliens walking all around us. Pookie was tripping. We're going to do this the rest of the night, are we? This is great. Okay. So we got Brian, Shaquille, Pookie, and then the last, we had our friend Christian. And Christian, the name fits, he was like the best of us. But that meant that Christian all the time was trying to make sure that we were doing our homework, that we were like behaving well. So he's like yapping my ear off about some homework assignments going on. All of this is happening while me and Michael are like antagonizing one another with our cars. And I remember at some point looking up, and Michael, he's like a mile ahead of me. I'm not even paying attention to him anymore. But what I was also doing, and I'm not proud of this, but I was also texting while I was driving. I know. And I'm looking down at my phone, and Brian is talking to me about Lil Wayne, and Shaquille is talking to me about basketball, and Pookie is trying to convince me that I might be an alien, and Christian wants to know if the science homework is done, and I hit send and look up, and Michael's car is no longer a mile ahead of me.
Michael's car is right here. And I run straight into the back of Michael's car, but here's the even crazier part. My car sat a little bit lower than Michael's, so I don't run straight into the back of Michael's. I drive under Michael's car. And he is sitting on the hood of my car, his car full of underclassmen. Listen, it's one thing to ask the question, have you ever been distracted? It's another question to ask, have you ever been distracted in such a way that it's actually been like detrimental to yourself? That it's potentially harmed you, or maybe it's potentially harmed others around you. This week, you guys are talking all about rest and what it looks like to find rest. And tonight, what I want to spend most of our time talking about are the things that get in the way of us finding rest. And the way that I want to talk about that is I want to read a story that some of you are going to be familiar with. Those of you who you're new to church or you haven't grown up around this Jesus thing, it's going to be a new story for you, but it's a simple story. It's a story about these two sisters who meet this man named Jesus. If you have a Bible, it's going to be in Luke chapter 10. We're going to start in verse 38. If you don't have a Bible, don't worry. It's going to be on the screen right behind me. Luke chapter 10, starting in verse 38. Luke, the gospel writer, he says these words. He says, as Jesus and his disciples were on their way, he came to a village where a woman named Martha, everyone say Martha. Martha opened her home to him. She had a sister called Mary who sat at the Lord's feet. Everyone say Mary. And she was listening to what he said. But Martha was distracted by all the preparations that had to be made. She came to him and asked, Lord, don't you care that my sister has left me to do this work by myself? How many of you have ever looked at your parents and said the exact same thing? Don't you care? You told us to clean the house and I'm doing everything and they're just sitting over there being lazy. She says, Jesus, would you tell her to help me? Martha, Martha, the Lord answered. A good little trick for you if you ever read your Bible frequently is that anytime something is repeated twice, God means business. Martha, Martha, the Lord answered. You are worried and upset about many things, but few things are needed, or indeed only one. Mary has chosen what is better, and it will not be taken away from her. I want to read that sentence one last time. Jesus says these words, Mary has chosen what is better, and it will not be taken away from her. You know, it can be easy to read a story like this and think to ourselves, man, Martha, what are you doing? Like Jesus is right in front of her. How in the world would you be up and doing anything else? I mean, how many of you have said to yourselves, or maybe you've even said it to God, like, God, if you were right in front of me, this whole faith thing would be so much easier. Oh my goodness, if Jesus was right there, man, any of the bad decisions I make would be so much easier not to make. If Jesus was right there, man, praying would be so much easier. If Jesus was right there, my belief would be so much easier. And we can look at Martha and say, Martha, I just can't believe that you would do this. Mary is obviously so much smarter and brighter than you. But you know what's true? Is that in the Christian faith, what we believe is that Jesus, he was born and he lived a perfect life and he died, but we believe that he was resurrected and then he ascended into heaven. And somewhere in that process, what he says to his followers, to his disciples, people like you and me, what he says is, him going away is actually not a bad thing, that him going away actually allows his spirit to be accessible to us at any given moment. So in so many ways, what is true for them is true for us, that Jesus is always accessible to you. That Jesus is always right in front of you. And what we choose to do with that reality, well, that's up to us. And the word that comes to mind when I think about it is posture. Posture, we often think about it in the way that you sit, right? Some people have bad posture and their shoulders are hunched over. Some people have great posture and they walk really tall. But posture is all about how you approach something. It's all about how you approach something. So when it comes to Jesus, there's all sorts of ways that you can approach him. One, some of you, maybe you got dragged here this week. Maybe you don't even know why you're here. But the way that you've approached Jesus is you're avoidant of Jesus. You're arm's length. Jesus, you can be over there for those people, but I'm not interested in you being around here for me. Some of you are standing with Jesus at arm's length. You're avoiding him. Some of you, though, the way that you've sort of set up your life is you're fine with Jesus being around you. Like, you're fine with being in proximity to him, but anything beyond, like, just sort of being able to see him, and like, okay, Jesus, I get that you're there. Like, you do your thing over there, I'll do my thing over here. And, like, when I need you, maybe I'll come a little bit closer to you, but when I don't need you, I'll sort of step back and do my own thing. So some of you can be avoidant, some of you can be around Jesus, but the great invitation of the Bible is not to avoid Jesus, it's not to simply be around him, it's to be with him. And that's what we see unfolding here in this moment with Mary and Martha, is that the invitation, the right posture, is taken by Mary. It's that she sits and she is with Jesus. And what she discovers when she's with Jesus is that she finds rest. The big thing that I'm trying to tell you here tonight, guys, is simply this, is that only being with Jesus can bring you rest. Only being with Jesus can bring you rest. Not being around him, not holding him at arm's length, but being with him, that is where you can find rest. So with the few minutes that we have left here tonight, all I want to do is look back over a couple of these verses and make some observations about this story and what it might have to do with my life and with your life. The first thing that I recognize in this text is this, is that it is actually possible for you to invite Jesus into your life and to still not live with Jesus. Catch the way that this story unfolds. It says, as Jesus and his disciples were on their way, he came to a village where a woman named Martha opened her home to him. But Martha had a sister called Mary who sat at the Lord's feet listening to what Jesus said. So catch the story. Martha is the one that sees Jesus and says, Jesus, would you come and spend time in my house? Would you come and be close to me? Would you come and be around me? But once Jesus gets there, who is it that actually ends up at Jesus' feet? It's not a rhetorical question. You guys know the answer to this. Mary. So it's actually possible for us to do the same thing. To say, Jesus, I want to surrender all of my life to you. I want to give my life to you. And yet find ourselves still just living around him. But the story gives us a really clear picture of how that happens. The thing that causes Martha to sort of move from being with Jesus to just being around him, the text says that she becomes distracted. She becomes distracted. What is it? What do we mean when we say distracted? Like, what is a distraction? When I think about a distraction, the way that I sort of define it in my mind as it sits in this story is that a distraction is anything that interrupts your life and keeps you from being with Jesus. It's anything that interrupts your life and keeps you from being with Jesus. Now, I don't know about you, but when I think of a distraction, distractions to me are like small, subtle things. They're like little annoyances that sort of creep up out of nowhere and mess my life up. But the way that the Bible thinks about distractions is not like that. The way that the Bible thinks about distractions, it uses a word. Some of you know this. The Bible wasn't originally written in English. It was written in a couple different languages, and it was translated over time into English. So in the Greek, the way that word distraction is sort of drawn up, it's meant to create a picture in your mind. And the picture is not of some small little thing that's like annoying you. The picture of a distraction is something that comes along in your life and grabs you by your shirt collar and yanks you around. It's meant to be a picture of something that's quite like violent and powerful. Something that shows up in your life and grabs you by your collar and starts dragging you all over the place. Some of you, when you think about your life and that desire to have peace and that desire to have rest, that's the image that your life feels like. It feels like you have no control over what's going on. It feels like there's some stuff just keeps showing up and just grabbing you and dragging you and pulling you from one place to the other. You know what's interesting about distractions is that they come from all sorts of places. For some of us, the distractions we keep experiencing are like external distractions. External distractions, it's like the little things that when you're like trying to pray or you're trying to read your Bible, you're trying to get ready to go to church, it's like these little things that keep pulling you away from it. For some of you, it's not external distractions that keep messing with you, it's the internal ones. Some of you know these internal ones really well. It's that voice that when you're at church and you're worshiping, maybe it's happened to you tonight, you start to hear that voice that says, man, you're not good enough to praise God like this. Imagine if God knew all the things that you had done wrong. Imagine if all these people in this room knew all the things you had done wrong, and all of a sudden, before you know it, you start to creep back inside of yourself and you stop worshiping. You're distracted. Or maybe for some of you, it's been when you've been like at church or in a youth group and you've wanted to start serving and using the gifts and the talents that God has given you. And so you told your youth pastor that, and before you know it, you started doing it, but then you started to notice that there were other people who also had gifts and talents. And you started to hear that same voice that said, man, your gifts and your talents, they're just not as good as theirs. You should just stop. Before you know it, again, you've sort of drawn back in to yourself. But I got to be honest, the external distractions, there's not much we can do about those. Those things just happen. The internal distractions, those are concerning. But the ones I'm the most concerned about are what I would call self-induced distractions. The things that we actually keep doing to ourselves. The things that we keep distracting ourselves with. I think about the great writer and thinker Ronald Rolheiser. He said this about self-induced distractions. If we can throw that quote up. He says this to us. He says, we, for every kind of reason, good and bad, are distracting ourselves into oblivion. You know what oblivion is? Cease to exist. So maybe you've never thought about distractions that way. Those distractions that you keep leaning into, you know what I'm talking about. The moment where you sit down to read your Bible, but you feel bored for like 5 seconds and you grab your phone and you scroll for the next 2 hours. I know none of you have ever done that. That feeling when you think, man, my life is it's stressful, it's a mess, I need someone to help me. And so you think for a moment, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to sit down and I'm going to talk to God about it. And before you know it, you've binged through 3 seasons of The Office. You know this feeling. It's not some external thing that's robbing you. It's not some internal thing. It's the choice that we keep making to distract ourselves. Because you know what's true? Is it is hard to be alone with God if you don't like being alone with yourself. It is hard to be alone with God if you don't like being alone with yourself. And what's happening is you are distracting yourself into oblivion, that the fullness, the life of God that is accessible to you is all of a sudden going to poof, evaporate. So friends, let me ask you this question tonight. What is the thing that keeps distracting you from Jesus? What is it? I imagine it's not the external stuff. I imagine it might not even be the internal stuff, but I can almost guarantee that there are things that all of us keep doing to ourselves in our lives that keep pulling us away from Jesus. So friends, what is the thing that keeps distracting you from Jesus? And to help you think about it a little bit more, I want to read another verse from this to help you maybe figure out what that might be. Verse 40, it says, but Martha was distracted by all the preparations that had to be made. Catch what's going on here. Martha has invited Jesus into her home. Mary is sitting at Jesus' feet, and Martha has become distracted by the preparations that had to be made. Well, what are the preparations that had to be made? Well, back then, if you are going to invite someone into your home, especially someone like Jesus, Jesus came with a mob of people behind him. He showed anywhere Jesus went, 12 of his friends came with him. And then anywhere those 12 came, more of their friends came with him. And then before you know it, there's always this language in the Gospels that the crowds would follow Jesus. To invite Jesus into your home implied that you were inviting a lot of people to be in and around your house. And so what's Martha doing? She's trying to make sure that the house is picked up. She's trying to make sure that Jesus has food to eat. She's trying to make sure that his disciples, who are sometimes great and sometimes really dumb, aren't going to start complaining that, like, the floor is uncomfortable for them to sit on. She's trying to make sure that everything is taken care of. What is Martha doing anything bad? No. Martha's distracted by something that's actually really good. She's being hospitable. She's being caring. She's trying to make sure that the people who are showing up to her house are not complaining about how uncomfortable it is. Martha is doing something good, which brings me to realize this, that good things Well, good things become bad things when they distract us from Jesus. Good things become bad things when they distract us from Jesus. I think about the word preparations that's used there. You know what's interesting about that word is that it doesn't mean necessarily all of the hospitality that she had to do. You know the way that that word is used throughout the rest of the Bible? It's used to translate into one word: service. Martha is up serving people. Martha is doing something very good, and yet it has become a bad thing. Why? Because it has distracted her from the real thing that matters. Students, I want to give you guys like a 60-second mental break here for a second, okay? 60 seconds, you can clock out, you can stop listening to me. I want to talk to the youth pastors and the youth leaders in the room for 60 seconds. That word preparations, it doesn't just get translated to service. It also gets used throughout the New Testament for the word ministry. So in other words, it's as if Jesus can look at us, pastors and leaders in the room, and say one of the easiest things for you to become distracted by is all of the good work that you are doing on behalf of God. All of the preaching, all the teaching, all the meeting with students, all of the coordinating small groups, all of the making sure kids got on the right buses here, those things are all possible to do and not be with Jesus. Now back to you students for a second. Some of you before the end of the week, you're going to make commitments in your life to be kingdom workers. You're going to make commitments with your life to become missionaries, to become pastors, to become nonprofit workers. Some of you, you're going to become kingdom workers, not doing those things. You're going to become doctors and teachers and artists and poets and creatives and architects, and you're going to do all sorts of things with the kingdom in mind. But you know what is true about our whole life? Is that it is possible to do all sorts of good things on God's behalf and not be with Him at all. And the great challenge for us will be to make the choice. Will we be Martha, who does a bunch of good things? Or will we be Mary, who chooses the right thing every time? See, I can't help but imagine that for Martha, part of the reason she's up moving around trying to make sure everything is going on, she has some low hum of anxiety in her life, convincing her that her just sitting still is not good enough. That there's something about if she can prove that she's worth it, if she can prove that her work matters, if she can prove that she's worthy of love and affection, well then she might just be good enough to sit at Jesus' feet. But Mary, she gets something. Mary gets that the amount of things she's accomplishing will not change the way Jesus thinks or feels about her. And the same is true for you. That the great lie you will believe throughout the rest of your life is that the more things you achieve, the more God will like you. That the more things you do that look good on a piece of paper, the more God will like you. The better college you can get into, the more God will like you. The more prestigious job you may have someday will make God like you more. Can I tell you, there is nothing that you can do right now that can make God like you any less, and there's nothing you can do right now that can make Him like you any more. God's love for you is completely in spite of what you do or do not do. Which means your invitation to sit down and rest is also not contingent on Him liking you. He loves you just as you are. And you know what's beautiful is once we know that, and it becomes so much easier to go, I'm going to move from being avoidant of Jesus. I'm going to move from being just around Jesus. I'm going to move to being with Jesus. See, good things can become bad things when they begin to distract us from Jesus. But you can feel the tension in this story. That Martha, she's not doing anything wrong. She's just turned something good into something not so good because she's gotten misfocused. And the text tells us that Mary does something better. Look at Jesus' words one last time tonight. Martha, Martha, the Lord answered, you are worried and upset about many things. For some of you, that's true too. You're worried and upset about many things. That low hum of anxiety is hanging around with you. But few things are needed, or indeed only one. Mary has chosen what is better, and it will not be taken away from her. Jesus' words there, Mary has chosen what is better. He's not being cryptic about what is better. What is better is that Mary has chosen Jesus in this moment. It was better for her, it's better for me, and it's better for you. The last thing that I recognize about this is that if we want to find rest, if we want to posture ourselves properly with Jesus, this is what's true. Jesus is ultimately the only thing that matters. When Jesus is right in front of us, accessible to us, Jesus is the only thing that matters. And here's what I know to be true about when you're in high school. When you're 14 to 18 years old, I know what you believe because I believe this too. I believed that everything mattered. I believed that every decision I was making was the most important or most life-altering decision that I could make. I believed that every event that I went to was important. I believed that every paper I turned in was the most important thing. I believed that every college application I turned in was the most important thing that was going on in my life. Can I tell you what is true? Jesus is the only thing that matters. When I was a senior in high school, I felt like my life was falling apart. I had become a Christian at some point, but I didn't know what that meant. I was compelled by Jesus. I thought Jesus was interesting. I thought Jesus was like a revolutionary. I thought Jesus was worth giving my time and energy to, but I didn't really know what that meant. And so as a senior in high school, I found myself one day, I woke up and I found that my life was not what I thought it would be. My academic life was feeling like it was being sort of pulled apart. My relational life felt like it was being sort of pulled apart. I didn't know if I had any real friends or not. I didn't feel like I had a future going in. I didn't know what was going on. My life felt like it was being pulled in a million directions. That feeling, that picture of someone grabbing me by my shirt collar and just dragging me around. That's what my life felt like. And I remember one day it just hit me that it was like too much and I needed to offload some of it somewhere. And so I went and sat in this teacher's classroom. Her name was Miss Reimer. And Miss Reimer, she's told me this years later that it was bizarre that I chose to come to her classroom because I gave Miss Reimer such a hard time. Like she almost quit her job so many times because of me. But for some reason, I felt safe enough to walk into that classroom one day, and I knew Miss Reimer was a Christian, although I don't know that was the reason I sat down to talk to her. And I just began like word vomiting all the things going on in my life. How my life felt like it was being pulled left and right, distracted. I didn't feel rest. I didn't feel peace. I felt exhausted. And no 18-year-old, no 17-year-old, no high school kid should feel exhausted. And I tell her all of this, and she just looks at me across her desk, and she goes, Rory, the biggest lie that high school kids are told is that these are supposed to be the best days of their life. She said, life gets so much better from here. And for some of you, that's going to be like the most profound thing you hear all week. You've been convinced that this is like the most important moment, most vital moment of your life. Life only gets better from here. But then she looked me in the eyes and she said, you know what your problem is right now, though? She was like, you are convinced that everything matters. She goes, Rory, there's only one thing that matters. And it's not your relationships, it's not your friendships, it's not if you get into the right college or not, it's none of that. She was like, the only thing that matters if you can find a way to stay close to Jesus. It's the only thing that matters. So friends, I ask you tonight, what might our lives begin to look like if instead of holding the posture of avoiding Jesus or just being around him, if we took a note from Mary and we just sat with him? I wonder what might happen. I wonder what God might say to some of us. I wonder if for the boy or the girl in this room who feels like they're worthless, if you just sat down with Jesus, if you might discover how much he loves you and how worth it you are to him. I wonder if for the girl in this room who keeps trying to find attention or affection from some boy and some worth, that what you might find if you just sat with Jesus for a moment is that he's got everything that you need. I wonder if for the guy in here who keeps trying to prove just how good you are, how strong you are, how powerful you are, how talented you are, that you might, if you sat with Jesus, what you might discover is that he doesn't need you to prove any of that to him. Friends, what might our lives look like tonight if instead of just being around him or holding him at arm's length, if we just sat down and chose to be with him? How might our lives look different? I want to invite you tonight. I want to pray over you, but I want to invite you, if you're comfortable with it, to take your hands and put them out in front of you. Just open them up. We do this to receive, to hear from God. Let me pray over you, and then we'll step back into a time of worship here for a moment. God, I thank you for this room of students. This room of students who is not afraid. This room of students who is brave enough to come to camp for a week and open their lives up to one another and to God. So God, tonight what I pray for them is that they would be brave enough to not have to do anything, but they would be brave enough to sit with you. And God, I don't pray that prayer. I pray that prayer full of faith. That there are some of you in here who it's the second night of camp, but for you this is like man, if God doesn't say something to me, I'm done with this. So God, my prayer is that you would speak to every student in this room. Would you let them know that their worth is not determined by what they do, that your love and affection for them is not determined by them being up and being busy. And for those in this room who will commit their lives to serve in ministry and to be kingdom workers, I pray that you would always remind them that doing a bunch of good things on your behalf, God, is not what it's about. It's about being with you. So as we step back into worship, would you speak to us? Would you keep speaking to us? Pray blessing and goodness over all my friends tonight. It's in your name we pray. Amen.